Okay, in this video we're going to be talking about notification settings, and we are going to be sending notifications to our device via the OneSignal dashboard and via the OneSignal API. This is the second video. I did one where we set up our user via API calls to receive notifications. So if you want to go back and watch that, you can. It will be on the screen somewhere right now. If you don't watch that, don't worry about it, because in this video I've actually set up the user a different way using the Flutter OneSignal SDK. So I'm going to go over that also, do that at the end, but first we'll do the notifications and sending them in the two methods. So our people that have already set themselves up can do so, but if you want to actually use the Flutter SDK to do it, you can stick around and go through that at the end for the second half of the video. It's a much simpler way of doing it than the API. So pros and cons for both options. So we'll go through it when we get to it. So let's get started. So we've got our user enabled notifications via these buttons. So, and we're set up on the OneSignal system. So on your OneSignal dashboard, basically you just go to new message and we want a new push in app. We can also do, it's one of the reasons why the SDK makes a bit more sense than using the APIs. Like I say, pros and cons, but it makes it easier handling in-app messages via the SDK. So again, something we're going to come on to, but although in-app is not going to be part of this video, but it's when we get to the pros and cons, we'll talk about them. So on a new push notification, so you need to give your campaign a name. So we'll call it Great Deals. Because obviously we want to be selling our users something, I suppose. Ultimately, that's kind of the I guess the point to much of this sort of stuff. So basically, you can send to all your subscribers, which is here, or you can send to particular segments. Now, particular segments will be different groups of users. So we'll do that, and if we include segments, you can create new segments and add users to them. So we could create a segment, but we're going to send to test subscriptions. We've got a test subscriber down here, and we come down. So obviously you can do it in different languages. We're going to just use English, and you need to give your message a title. And as you'll see on the screen on the right here, you'll see what it's going to look like when it's done. So Luffen, don't know where that is. London is what we're looking for. And then we can send the user the message. So 20% discount, 5-star stays. The launch URL, that will be what launches when your user clicks on it. So I'll tell you what we'll do. Okay, so in there we'll just add obviously that'd probably be your own website, or it'd be an affiliate link or something, or however you're going to do it. So, but we're going to send our users to booking.com for their 5-star discount stays. And here, okay, so our next bunch of settings are specific to Android. So what we're going to be doing, because this was an Android demonstration originally, I'm just going to go through these quickly. So the small icon, default is a bell. Obviously you can set something else. So for categories, you can create some categories and you can set some parameters on how you want your notifications to look and sound. But if you set it for none, it will just use the device defaults. You can play with that obviously to your heart's content. And then the priority doesn't get it delivered any quicker. It's to do with how Android basically deals with the message in terms of displaying it and waking the phone up, etc. And then you can add some action buttons, so you can play around with those, and then you can schedule your delivery. So we can send it to everybody at the same time. Now, thing to remember about these are push notifications. So these are the ones that, if we open up, so we're in Android Studio. So these are push notifications. These are the ones that sit in your notification tray. Now, what happens is, if your app is in focus, i.e. it's on the one that's being used, your notifications won't show up in the app. That's what the in-app notifications are for. These will be delivered when the app is out of focus in the background and your user's logged in. that's in the documentation. So if we head back to there and we just send that notification, and then message started sending. So it's been delivered. Now that doesn't necessarily mean delivered to the device. When you read documentation, all that's telling you the notification has been delivered to the Google Firebase cloud messaging servers, and they're then dealing with it basically. Although Google say they are delivered at the same time, but let's see. So let's have a look. If we just drop down and then we go, look, great deals on London hotels. Get 20 minutes in October, 5-star stays. And it's going to launch booking.com. was going to launch something. There we go. So, don't need cookies. Right, so that's how you send them from the dashboard. Okay, so that is obviously pretty straightforward. Sending messages from the OneSignal dashboard. So what I'm going to move on to now is to Supabase, and we'll look at how I've set up doing it via the OneSignal API. So if we head over there, now I have got a table here called products, and the idea is that obviously you could do this for any table that you wish, but for this instance what I'm doing, every time there's an update in this table, it gets a new row. We have a trigger which operates a function that connects to the OneSignal API and sends a push message to our users basically. So new row in here, trigger a function, get a notification basically. And as always, any snippets of code that you see on the screen here, you'll be able to copy and paste from a link down below. So essentially there are 3 functions. You could do it in 2. I've decided to do it in 3, and I'll explain to why when I get to it. So essentially, first thing we're doing is creating a trigger after an insert on the public.products table, and for each new row we're going to execute a function called push, which is the one that calls the push notification function. This is the call push function, and all that does in turn is calls the send push OneSignal function. Now the reason I did it is because this has to return a trigger for this to function. This particular, the one that you call from the trigger, has to return a trigger. But our sending push notification returns a JSON, which we're not really doing anything with, but it's the one that tells us the success or not of our API call. So therefore, if we have any issues, we can debug and that kind of stuff, which is why I've done it that way. So we're still getting the response from the API for us to be able to deal with it if we need to. So this is the function that actually sends the notification. So if we just quickly go into database and we go into triggers, and we're here in the public schema, we've got that trigger set up, and that then, as I said, through a separate function actually calls this one, which sends the message to the OneSignal API. So this is very much the same as I said in the previous video. If you've watched any of my videos, you'll recognize this. I don't change it very much. I just change the bits that are necessary. So we have the main content of the JSON, the body of the JSON for the request, which is setting up there. I will come back to that in a second when we load documentation. We have got our headers. We've got the type is post. We've got our API endpoint. And then we've got the authorization with the API key. Now, like I've said previously, I've hard-coded in this particular one. Normally you'd see me have done it through the Supabase Vault, which is very easy to do, and there is a video on that which will come on the screen now. And then again, we've got the content type in headers and whatnot, and then we are sending the content there, and we're getting the response, which is the success code or not, as the case may be, and any data associated with that. So the request itself, on the documentation, if you remember this from the previous video, there is a handy section at the bottom where you can actually construct your request here, so you know what you're doing. So you'll have you need to put your app ID, that's required. What segments you targeting? If you remember, previously we used test subscriptions. Again, there's some more options which obviously you can play with this Hux content as usual. Your content is obviously required. English is a requirement. All the other languages are not. We can give it a header if we wish. Again, not a requirement. And then, if you remember there in the original message we sent a few minutes ago, we used booking.com as the URL. And then say loads and loads of different options, not really any of which are required. But so you can read this and play with them. I'll put a link to this documentation down below. Even if you've got a OneSignal account, obviously you'll have it anyway, but I'll put a link down below in case you want to read up on it before you start. So, and then your API key, that is obviously required. So this tool is really good. It gives you, so you can set up your request here in the examples, so you know how to format it in your API request that you're making. And that's what we've done here using the build object. And then our message is, get some discount on some attractions. We send it to test subscriptions. We have to send the app ID, obviously. And then our heading is 20% cheaper Halloween. That's just, just a testing I've set up. And that's it really. And then what will happen is on the update of the table with a new row, it'll just trigger this. So I have hard coded these in again as a test, these values here and that one specifically, those two. You'd probably want to put them in if you're doing this on, depending on what table you're using and how you were using your notifications, you may want to put these as variables passed into the function, because it's just a more efficient way of doing it. Obviously, rather than keep changing this function to hard code them in, that's just not efficient at all, obviously. So again, for this purpose of the test, I've done that, but you want to do it with variables, you can, and there's those videos. Well, I've done this on many occasions, so I'm sure you've seen those as well. So that's how you set up it based on a trigger, and this is how you create the API call to the OneSignal API. So if I head over to the actual device, now I did this earlier, so I won't trigger it again. So if I look at the notification history on the device, you can see there we've got the 20% Halloween discount notification in our tray, as well as the other ones where I've been playing around with this previously. So as I said at the beginning, I've done this via the OneSignal SDK. Previous video we did it via all by API calls, and I thought I'd try something different for this one and see how that functions and if it was easier, and it definitely is easier, rather than, if you remember, it got a bit convoluted in the end. So if we go to pub.dev, this is the package we're using, basically the OneSignal Flutter package, and we are bringing it into our code as a dependency. So start OneSignal on the bottom right hand side there. You can see we've got the dependency for the Flutter, and then we've got the couple of snippets of code we need in the actions to make it work. So if we head to enable notifications, so the enable notifications and notification settings rows are both conditionally visible. So if our device is showing that we are authorized to have notifications, then we get the notification settings, so then we can switch them off. If they're not authorized, we get enable notifications, which allows us to switch them on. And we're doing that via a custom action on page load, which is check notification permissions. And what that does, it goes and checks our device, see if we've got notifications enabled, and for that we need Firebase messaging package to use that. And again, on the previous video I mentioned this as well, but if you haven't watching that or you're not watching that, you can't use any package later than 14.9.2 with Flutterflow. That's because the Firebase core package that Flutterflow uses is not compatible with anything later than that. So all we're doing, and we split this really between authorized or not. So if it's authorized, you get the notification settings. If it's anything other than authorized, you'll get the enable notification settings. So that hasn't changed. So to enable notifications, you can already see it's a lot simpler. So I'm still requesting permission via the Flutterflow system. So on our settings and permissions, we've got it switched on there. Yeah, we'd like to send you push notifications. There is an option to do this with the SDK in actual fact, and that is in the documentation. Again, I'll put a link for the documentation here for the SDK section as well. And then we can ask permission via OneSignal. I haven't actually tried that version, if I'm being honest. I just stuck with the one I already had, and then we're saying if it's true or false. With the request permission, then we'll get the standard Android box that requests permission to send notifications, and if our user says no, thank you very much, it doesn't do anything, it just sort of terminates. There's nothing else to do because we're not having notifications. If they say yes, what we are doing is starting OneSignal. So again, that's much more simple. That just calls that custom action we had up a few minutes ago, start OneSignal. So we have to initialize OneSignal with our app ID, and then simply opt in our user to subscriptions, and then that will allow us to receive notifications. And that's how this is functioning on the version that we've been using for this demonstration in this video. What will happen is then our notification settings will be visible, and then on the notification settings, when you tap, that still brings up an alert dialog called notification, which is a custom component. And again, I've styled this to look a little bit like the standard Android one. And if we want to keep them active, basically it just dismisses the dialog because there's nothing to do. If we want to turn off notifications, we've got custom action to stop OneSignal, navigating back to the user page, and we're opening the app settings. So custom action stop OneSignal, essentially the same as what we've just had for starting OneSignal, except we're opting out of notifications. And then the other action at the end there opens the app settings within our device, and that is another custom action which simply opens settings for our app so we can disable notifications, and that relies on package app settings 5.1.1, again all available on pub.dev. So that's how the setup is being configured for the version we've used today. Everything should work the same with the doing it by the API, but as you can see, this is much more efficient way of doing it. It's so many less lines of code, so many less actions and condition actions, so less that can go wrong. It's just simpler. But each to their own on how you want to do that. There is a whole, if our user decides to turn off notifications, our first action is to stop OneSignal. So we've unsubscribed a user, and then we're opening the app settings, and then we're relying on the user to manually unsubscribe at that point as well. So we might have, if they then change their mind, we'll have a situation where the user's device has got it as active, but OneSignal has been disabled. On the, if I go to the main branch, so this is what I did for that on the other version, the API version. I haven't set it up on the SDK version yet, although I will do, because I will use the SDK going forward. It's just so much easier. So on page load for our settings page, we're checking if the user is device is authorized and permission is false. So if our table shows they're not subscribed, but our device permissions show they are subscribed, and then we're updating the user to basically resubscribe them because the device still says they should be. And likewise, if that returns false, there's another check you need to do, and that is if the device is not authorized, but we haven't somehow reset the table to true, then we are unsubscribing that user via the API call there, like if you remember that from the previous video. So they're just a couple of options on page load which you'd probably want to do in case, because obviously your user may not act in the way you intend them to. So there's some conditions there you would do just to make sure that the device and the OneSignal API are aligned all the time in terms of your user subscription status. But that's something that we can work out there. So that's something I've done this on this version, which is the main bar to this project, which is the API version, and I haven't yet initialized it on this version because obviously we're just checking permissions on the phone. So that's it really. This is much easier. It's using it this way. Obviously now you know how to send the notifications via the API and through the dashboard. So hopefully this has covered what you need. I do know that this has been Android and iOS. I will come back to this in a future video, and also I will cover in-app notifications in a future video. But for push notifications under Android devices, that should cover you off. So if it does, please consider liking and subscribe as usual, and I'll speak to you next time.